Good afternoon. I'm Aaron Stam, and I'm the Director of Natural Resources for the Seminole Tribe of Florida, Incorporated. I'm based out of South Florida on the Brighton Reservation, as well as I have offices on the Big Cypress Seminole Reservation. Our Brighton facility and reservation is just on the northwest side of the Great Lake Okeechobee in Florida, and the Big Cypress Reservation are on the headwaters of the Everglades in South Florida. Our natural resource program has many different departments. The cornerstone of the natural resource department is our tribal member cooperative cattle program. These cooperative ranches are owned by individual tribal owners or families. We also have cattle that are owned by our board of directors that are both on and off reservations. We have bulls, a bull program on both the Brighton and Big Cypress Reservation, as well as heifer development programs on both reservations. The Brighton and Big Cypress reservations have historically had citrus, although citrus is only being grown on the Brighton Reservation right now. We're also growing sugarcane on the Brighton Reservation, and both reservations have land use departments. Our Big Cypress Reservation focuses on federal contracts with the BIA as far as road maintenance, mowing, and right-of-way clearing, while our Brighton Reservation focuses on our shell pit mining operation. I'll talk a little bit about that more later. Before I get too far, I'd definitely like to acknowledge the Seminole Tribe's departments that make the Natural Resources Department possible. Our Seminole Environmental Resource Management Department, also known as ERMD, is in charge of making sure that there's clean and adequate water flowing through the reservations. Water in South Florida, or the entire state of Florida, has become quite an issue. The state of Florida continues to have people move to the state at a rate of 1,000 people per day. This is putting great stress on the water, on the quantity of water needed, as well as the quality of water. South Florida has had a raging debate for the last several years about poor quality water and who's responsible for that. Many folks have tried to blame agricultural endeavors, yet many of us believe that the increased population as well as septic systems are putting a great deal of phosphorus back into our watersheds here in Florida. I started a rabbit trail there. I won't go down that too far. The next department that we're very dependent upon is our wildlands department. Now, this is a fire department that specifically focuses on our pasture areas, as well as our what we would call traditional pasture areas, which are native grounds that have not been disturbed and had grasses planted on them. These ecosystems are considered fragile, and fire is a great management tool to keep out invasive species, as well as keeping our natural plant population healthy. We also work closely with our Tribal Historic Preservation Office, known as TIPO. As we develop our land and work to increase and fight invasive weeds, we need their clearance to do anything that disturbs the ground to make sure we're not disturbing any culturally or historically significant grounds of the tribe. We also have many state and federal level partners. I don't have time to get into all of them, but I'd first like to recognize the Bureau of Indian Affairs, also known as the BIA. The BIA furnishes us with an agriculture grant that is responsible for many of the staff and programs that we're able to carry out on the reservation. It also provides us with a noxious weed grant that allows us to buy chemicals and pay for labor in the combating of many of the noxious weeds that we're facing. We're very thankful to the BIA for their help and support. We also work closely with the National Resource Conservation Service, known as the NRCS. The NRCS and their EQIP funds are able to help tribal ranchers improve the environment, as well as the NRCS has provided us with funds to seek out technical assistance. We've also written a grant that's been funded by the National Association of Conservation Districts. The grant I wrote last year is funding 2 grazing specialists. Currently, we have 1 person in place, and interviews are happening for the 2nd position, and we hope to have someone in place very shortly. As I mentioned before, on the Brighton Reservation, there is a mining operation. Several thousand years ago, the entire state of Florida was covered by the ocean, short of a few small parcels of land that were not underwater. But when the waters receded, it left great deposits of shale, caprock, and sand. This shale and caprock has great value for compaction material for both home sites and road construction. The Natural Resources mines those products on the Brighton Reservation. We then process them and sell them off reservation, as well as they're used for, as I mentioned, home sites and roads on the Brighton Reservation. We do have several thousand acres of sugarcane on the Brighton Reservation. If you're not familiar with sugarcane production, many people, when they first see it, think it looks like immature corn. It is a monocot, it is a grass. The sugarcane that you're looking at right there uses ditches and canals for flood irrigation. When it's time to harvest that sugarcane, our tribal department burns the thatch of that, which forces more of the sugars up into the stalk, and then we subcontract the harvest out through a variety of companies to help us harvest and then replant that sugarcane. The sugarcane operations has been a wildly successful venture for the Natural Resources Department and the tribe, and we are looking at ways whether or not we should expand those operations to capture more revenue. Unfortunately, the status of all citrus operations in the state of Florida, the future is bleak. There have been many sicknesses and diseases that have affected citrus throughout the state. Currently, the newsmaker is greening, which is affecting our citrus groves by causing early fruit drop, as well as subclinical issues in the plant, from nutrient uptake to irregular flowering, things of that nature, that our citrus groves in Brighton are under a great deal of duress. It is one of the challenges of running the natural resource program. Is many folks like to use the term sustainability, and I have come to enjoy the term adaptability. That if the citrus industry proves to not be one that's economically viable, the tribe cannot and will not continue to support that industry, and then we have to have the ability to adapt and utilize that ground for something else. So that is something that is currently being looked at, is how to best utilize those grounds that are in citrus operations, whether they continue or we pivot and explore new alternatives in those acreages. The history of the Seminole cattle program is great. It's one of the few places that can say that they've been producing cattle for over 500 years. It's first documented that the Spanish showed up in Florida in 1521, and cattle were in many of those vessels. Those cattle quickly escaped from the Spanish encampments, and the natives living in Florida captured and began the animal husbandry with those cattle. It was first recorded that monks and Seminoles worked together to develop ranching processes and best management techniques in 1650. In 1740, the Creek Indians and many other tribes were relocated to Florida. It was many people's idea that Florida would become a peaceful Indian state. The Creeks and the Mycotoxins, who were already inhabiting Florida, combined into the tribe that we now know as the Seminole Tribe of Florida. In 1775, Chief Cowkeeper was said to have had over 10,000 head of cattle on Payne's Prairie, which is just north of Ocala, Florida, right outside of Gainesville. The modern cattle program was started in 1936. I was fortunate enough to hear the story from one of the tribal elders who has since passed. He explained to me as a young man, he and his father went to the town of Okeechobee to meet the train full of cattle coming from out west. They were Dust Bowl cattle being shipped from western states to Florida for cattle production. He said as they entered the town of Okeechobee, they could smell the death and dying cattle on the train. The cattle were in such poor condition that what had been initially planned as a 3-day cattle drive to move the cattle from Okeechobee back to Brighton took several months because of the overall poor condition and the hundreds of dead cattle that were on that train. 5 years later, the U.S. government came back and inspected those cattle. And in 1941, the U.S. government deemed that the Seminole cattle program was wildly successful, and the first cattle were moved from Brighton to the Big Cypress Reservation. As you can imagine, cattle production is a way of life for the Seminole tribe. Many people are involved actively in the 66 ranches. The picture that you're looking at right there is a group of employees and tribal members who have just shipped loads of calves. We usually begin shipping calves the first week after the 4th of July, and we ship calves for 7 days from the Brighton Reservation, Monday through Saturday, and then my employees and staff have Sunday off to get home and see their families, and then we head down to the Big Cypress Reservation and ship calves over the next 5 days there. At that point in time, we have cow crews that gather the cows and calves in the field in individual owners' cow pens. Those animals are then trailered to our shipping pens where they are sorted by size and sex and then sold off through our Superior Livestock Auction Services. It's one of the things our Natural Resource Department does. We handle all the vaccination protocols, all the health protocols, as well as the marketing of the Seminole Tribe's cattle. As I mentioned, there are 40 individual ranches or owners on the Brighton Reservation. Those ranches encompass a total of 36,000 acres, 14,000 of those acres being improved acreage. Now, what that means is that the land has been cleared and improved varieties of grasses have been planted. Both reservations raise commercial Brangus cattle. Brangus cattle, for those of you that don't know, are a combination of Brahman and Angus influenced cattle. They are 3/8 Brahman and 5/8 Angus. And we have found that that variety of cattle is well suited to the subtropical environment in South Florida. They're able to finish nicely in feed yards and provide high quality meat, as well as withstand the heat and mosquitoes and predation threats that are unique to South Florida. As I mentioned, there are 26 ranches on the Big Cypress Reservation that would encompass 55,000 total acres. 11,000 of those acres are the improved acreage. One of the other unique characteristics about the Seminole Tribal Cattle Program is that 60% of the owners are female, that the tribe has a maternal structure, and so it's very, I guess, not the norm in the industry that the majority of the ranches and the cattle operations are owned by women of the Seminole tribe. Our native pastures look like what you're seeing in the background there. In Big Cypress, those native pastures consist of palmettos, cypress heads, swamps, as well as several oak hammocks on the Brighton Reservation. Our improved is you can see this actual picture was taken on the Big Cypress Reservation. You can see where that's Miss Janice Osceola standing with her granddaughters. Her cattle are standing on bahia grass, which is the grass that's been eaten very closely to the ground. That is a preferred species of grass by many cattle ranchers. But then even in that picture, the clump type grass that is right in front of the two young ladies, that is smut grass. And through our grazing practices, we've been able to derive great value from that smut grass for cattle production. There are also several other invasive species in that picture that might be a little hard to point out, but we utilize our cattle to help maintain our ground and fight against invasive species through improved grazing practices. Our native and improved pastures are subject to an annual burn. The fire that you see there has been intentionally set by our Wildlands Department. It is helping clear invasive species as well as protecting native plant populations. And fire is a very valuable tool to help us keep our fragile ecosystem in balance. There's a great picture of an improved pasture on the Brighton Reservation. As you can see, there are still some palmettos standing in the background, as well as in the very back, you can see an oak hammock on some higher ground. The majority of the grass that you see in front of you is Bahia, either Argentine or Pensacola Bahia. It has great value as forage, as well as it's able to withstand the high water tables and we're either out of water or underwater in our reservation. So at this time of year, we're very, very dry. But when the rainy season begins in a couple months, many of the pastures that you've seen will be underwater. And Bahia has a great deal of resilience to continue growing and provide nutrition for our cattle. As I discussed before, smut grass is a huge problem across the entire state of Florida, but it has affected many of the tribal ranches. The picture that you're viewing right there is myself and the former natural resource manager, Alex Johns. We had been undergoing a smut grass grazing field trial that we called Pasture X. And typically, cattle are grazed one animal unit is given 2.75 acres in South Florida. Alex and I decided to do something very different. We took two cows per acre and put them on the heaviest infested smut grass areas we could find. We had a 93% conception rate and an 89% calf crop rate, as well as some of the most profitable cattle operations on the reservation through our Pasture X experiments. Our improved grazing techniques were wildly successful for us, although it has been hard to get folks to embrace the change, as smut grass is seen as a weed and invasive species, but yet our tribal members have been quick compared to the rest of the. One of the other challenges that was unique that we discovered several years ago was mycotoxins in our subtropical forages. And mycotoxins are a secondary metabolite of fungus. And really, that's a lot of words, but there's a lot of different types of funguses in the soil and the grass. And many of these funguses can produce basically a self-defense mechanism that we would call a mycotoxin. And we were seeing subclinical and clinical issues in several herds of cattle, including early onset abortions. Alex and I looked early on to see if there was some sort of a mineral deficiency or a poisonous plant. We couldn't find anything. So we continued to look and read and think, and stumbled across the idea that maybe it was mycotoxins. So we began sampling our grasses, and since then we've completed over 300 individual samples of subtropical forages across the reservations, and we have found that 86% of those samples contain zearalenone. Now, zearalenone is a particularly troublesome mycotoxin as it mimics estrogen in the cow's body. This means our cows can become hyperestrogenic, which can cause the early onset abortions. We also believe it can cause irregular heat cycles, as well as other subclinical issues that can put the cow into duress. We also believe it can affect the fertility in our bulls. So we have partnered, the Seminole tribe partnered with the University of Florida, a company called Biomin that makes a mycotoxin abatement product, as well as our molasses company. We provide cattle molasses as a supplement. It's also a carrier of our mineral packages that our cattle need in South Florida. And we began putting BioFix, was Biomin's product, into our molasses. We were very successful with that product and had abstracts published at 2 World Nutrition Forums, both the 2016 World Nutrition Forum in Vancouver and the 2018 World Nutrition Forum that was held in South Africa. As I stated before, we have partnerships with federal partners. The National Resource Conservation Service is one of them. They have been huge in providing me the salary to hire a conservation compliance coordinator. She works specifically at looking at environmental quality incentives program, also known as EQIP. She's done a phenomenal job connecting the local NRCS agents with our tribal cattle owners. She's been very helpful in organizing and implementing current contracts, as well as looking at contracts that were near expiring and being able to help prioritize those that put the Seminole tribe in danger of being penalized for lack of contract implementation. She's also helped me create standard operational procedures for future contracts that will help streamline processes and the issues that have to happen for the implementation of those contracts, such as our TIPO review, our ERMD reviews, and then the actual implementation of those contracts and practices by our cattle owners. Finally, she works in coordination with our grazing specialists to maximize the impacts of our equip. As I mentioned, those grazing specialists, we have one right now. Hopefully we'll be hiring a second. We received that funding from the National Association of Conservation Districts. The focus of those grazing specialists is to do pasture assessments, see what types of weeds and grasses of forages are there, monitor those invasive species, as well as take soil samples for analysis to help us make sure that our fertilizer applications are appropriate. And they've also helped develop grazing plans for individual cattle owners. It's one of the things we're very proud of. We have not used phosphorus in any of our fertilizer applications for the last 6 years. Our ability to pull soil samples and analyze them, I think, has been very, very helpful in making sure that our water quality remains high. Finally, as I mentioned before, adaptability is a key to natural resource program. We need to continue to work with the Bureau of Indian Affairs to maintain and preserve tribal lands. I think our biggest priority right now with that is combating invasive species across reservations. Next, we need to look at working to maintain sustainability of operations, reducing risk to tribal producers, and explore emerging markets and options as the agricultural environment changes. We know the environment is changing here. We know opportunities as well as the economic systems are changing. So we need to be able to react to those changes and not take risks, but continue to explore options for income streams. Finally, we will continue to look for partners, practices, and ideas that will improve our environment and ensure the profitability, sustainability, there's my favorite word, adaptability of our agricultural practices. And I may have gone a minute or too long, but I think I could have talked on some of this. So I hope I haven't bored you too much. My contact information is on the screen there, my email, as well as my cell phone number. Don't call me this week, I'm fishing in the Keys. But feel free to send me an email if there's anything that I can provide you with, or if you're gonna be in the South Florida area and would like to take a stop out on the reservation and look at some of the practices that we have, we would be happy to host you and have lunch together. So I hope you've enjoyed the presentation and hope you all have a great rest of the conference. Thank you very much.